This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain and cryptocurrency space. My guest today is Paddy Cerri. Paddy is the chief blockchain architect at the Minima Protocol. And well, that is what we'll be talking about today. I've been looking at this, quite fascinating actually. Looking forward to learning much more. Welcome to the show, Paddy.
Thanks very much for having me, Andy. My pleasure.
So we'll do what we do at the beginning of the show, sir. I'll invite you to please introduce yourself. Love to hear just a little bit about your personal backstory, what you've been doing in the lead up to effectively co-founding and architecting the Minima Protocol.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm your classic nerd. I've been coding for 40 years now. Started on the ZX Spectrum 48K, for those of you that remember. And I've been coding ever since. I suppose the weird bit is that at no point did I decide to give up the pits and become a manager of coders. I've really started doing that recently. But yeah, it's always been about the code for me. So started off in the games industry after university, writing physics engines, which is where my sort of mathematical background comes in. Then, as many of us do, went off into blockchains. Went off into databases, SQL servers, websites, Java, et cetera. And then in 2012, fell down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Bitcoin talk. One of the great experiences of anybody's life, if they were on that forum back in the day at the beginning. Incredible thought processes and discussions were had on there. And once you start falling, there's really no end to that. So that's been going on for about 10 years. And about 4 or 5 years ago, the Minima Protocol started to move its way across my mind as my implementation of what I believe blockchains are here to do. And I got together with a very good friend of mine, started a company, and we've been working on that ever since.
Fantastic. And I think that's actually a really good way to approach this, Paddy. So just in my brief reading of your background and some of the things you've published on, the Minima website and elsewhere around the web, certainly get the sense, as you've explained, you were there essentially on the Bitcoin forums at the beginning or near enough to the beginning. And, I can sense that you're a real, true Bitcoiner at heart, as a lot of us are. But I also I also get the sense that, part of that passion is that you, I suppose you become aware of any weaknesses, if you like, in Bitcoin, and you're obviously so passionate that you've gone out and done perhaps the Minima Protocol with a view to fixing some of those weaknesses. So I know I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but maybe take us back to the early days of Bitcoin and that kind of promise and potential, and then where did things start to gnaw away at the back of your mind, if you like?
Absolutely. Well, really, when I refer to Bitcoin, I'm really referring to the whole movement. Bitcoin isn't just a piece of software. I don't think it is an understatement to say that Bitcoin has changed the world. It has opened up many people's minds to just how this world works. And when Bitcoin first came out, many people wondered what it was for, why you needed it. What's wrong with our current institutions? What does it do that we don't already have? And once you start scraping away at that, once you start seeing the reality of how our world is run, you start to realize just quite how important the foundations of what Bitcoin is trying to do are. So the reason that people were so excited about Bitcoin was because it was all about freedom, and it was all about trying to give control back to the people, which has been eroded over time and taken over by institutions. Bitcoin does this by coming up with a system that allows us to transact value without having to rely on a middleman. This was the promise. This was the premise. This is why we all got involved into Bitcoin in the first place. It came along and said, look, when you want to send some money to someone, you have to ask permission. Even that was quite a strange thought. You're like, yeah, I asked my bank and they send the money. And then actually you find that sometimes your bank doesn't let you do this. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why won't they let me? Isn't this my money? Can't I just choose where it goes? And really the words that we're looking for are censorship resistance. This is at the absolute core of what the crypto movement is, this idea that you don't need to be, permission. You don't need to ask someone whether or not you can do something. You should be allowed to do it, especially with something as important as your money. And this is just, an incredible concept that grabbed many of us and has never let go. So at the base of this, the thing that Bitcoin does that nothing had done before and that we had not been able to do before it was to come to consensus in a decentralized way. And the reason it needs to be decentralized is because centralized systems are so easy to attack. So as soon as there's somebody at the center of whatever system you're running, he or they are where the powers that be choose to squeeze. That is where the pressure is exerted. And it doesn't matter how many people there are on the leaf nodes. That doesn't matter how big your society or your group is. If only a few people are right at the middle of it, that is the only place that matters. And before Bitcoin came along, it just wasn't possible for us to do that. This sounds strange. I know people must be wondering, what do you mean by that? Well, what I mean is that if you've got, if you have a system and you have some information that you have to disseminate to all the people, then there's really no way of doing that, BB, before Bitcoin, other than having somebody standing in the middle and you all tell him something or tell the person, and they're the ones that disseminate that information to all the other people, especially if the order, if the sequence of events matters. I pay you, you pay somebody else. It's not that you pay somebody else and then I pay you. The sequence of the timing of these things is important. And everybody has their own way of seeing things. Everybody has their own desires about what the order should be. And so actually coming to consensus in a decentralized way simply was not possible. We didn't have the algorithms, we didn't have the tech, we just couldn't do it. And if we could have done it, we'd have done it by now. You know what I mean? I mean, it's objective. It's just like we simply didn't have a process for doing that. And so along comes Satoshi, and he says, here you go, I've got this thing called a blockchain. And the reason the blockchain is cool is because you can send these packets of information to lots of people on the network, and then all the people on the network can independently do things. Yeah, we're not asking other people, we're all doing our own thing. And then I get some information and I add my information to it and my block to it and I transmit that. And at the end of it, very strangely and amazingly, we can all agree on what the state is. And this was really the breakthrough that excited so many of us, mathematical computer scientists, cryptographers, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was, the beginning of a love affair, really, that has never ended. I suppose for me, the first arguments in the relationship started to occur, during the SegWit wars. I'm not sure, whether you know about that. I'm sure you do, Andy. That was a discussion about whether, some factor of Bitcoin, whether we should make blocks bigger or not. Yeah. Now, when I'd originally started using Bitcoin, I was one of the old school, and I ran it on my desktop, and I had the -gen parameter, and everybody was the same. We were all running the same software. It absolutely was a decentralized system. And then as soon as this happened, it occurred to me that I had suddenly become a bit player. It occurred to me that my opinion in this matter didn't matter. It occurred to me that actually we had now reached a duopoly where we had those who run the network and we had those who use the network. I'm referring to the miners and the users. I'm referring to this idea that pervades the entire crypto industry. Every single blockchain out there does the same thing. And what they do is that they outsource the running of the network to a select group of people. They say, look, why don't you run the network and I'll use the network and we'll pay you. Yeah, we'll give you a reward. If you find a block, we'll give you some Bitcoins. If you're staking Ethereum, we'll reward you in that way. They've decided that they're not capable of doing it themselves and that we have to ask somebody to do this for us. And this was a problem for me. This started to gnaw away at me. And I was thinking to myself, is there some other way of doing this? Can we come up with a system where we don't have this two-tier system, where we do have a system where all users are equal, where we do actually have, for me, a decentralized protocol strikes me that everybody should be running the same protocol, in the same way, in the same way. It shouldn't be that some users run it in one way and other users run it in another way. And it certainly shouldn't be the case that some users have more power over whatever it is that's happening than other users. And so that was the birth of Minima. That's when I started to think about, is it possible to come up with a different system to the way that they're currently doing it?
Yeah, fantastic. Really well said, Paddy. And I want to get to Minima, but can we just kind of nutshell this again for the listeners? So effectively, you see the how to say this, perhaps the kind of the potential monopolization of Bitcoin mining, where there's only so many players that control so much of that mining hash power, if you like. There's potential there for something to go wrong in terms of, they could potentially collude if they really had some motive to do so, or a nation state could potentially try and take over the miners and get too much control. Is that how you characterize the weakness, or is it something else? And we're talking about
well,
Bitcoin
Andy,
here.
this is the oldest. Yes, no, absolutely. This is the oldest story in the book. We've seen this 10,000 times, and what I mean by that is that mining is an industry. It's a business. And when you have businesses, Bitcoin is a beautiful piece of tech, but it doesn't break basic economic tenets, and economies of scale kick in, and the bigger get stuff cheaper and then get bigger than all the others can possibly get. We've seen this in every single industry. We've seen this in every single business, and there's only one way this ends, and it's called a monopoly. And we call in the Monopolies Commission, and they come in and they break up the company and they, regulate it, and, they have to get involved. And, the problem is that regulation, should it be required, breaks the system. So absolutely, I see mining centralization as an issue. Absolutely, I see a centralization trend emerging from this system that maybe wasn't obvious at the beginning. In the beginning, this didn't seem like it would be what it is today. But the truth is that it doesn't actually matter how many miners there are. What matters is the size of the cartel that owns 51%. That's the only thing that matters. You can have 10 million people mining, but I bet you 3 of them own 51%. And this is objectively what we are seeing on everything, on every chain, whether it's a power chain, whether it's a POS chain. I mean, POS is a different issue, yeah? The idea that you should give control over the money to those that have the most money is clearly not the way to go. So proof of work is the way to go with this. But for me, it's, on a technical level, the simplest way of describing what I consider to be the flaw in Bitcoin is the Coinbase transaction. This idea that you need to be paid for doing your work, for protecting the network. It didn't have to be that way. Bitcoin relies on a few large players doing a lot of work. And actually the mind shift came in when I realized that a small number of players times a big number is a big number. But a lot of little players, billions of small users times a small number is also a big number. So is there a way of creating a network where, instead of relying on a few people who simply get bigger and bigger, who are paid and incentivized to acquire the weaponry to attack the network, is there another system where we can actually rely on all of us, on the potentially billions of users who will be using this? And that's what Minima tries to do.
All right. So again, yep, that brings us nicely to Minima then. So I don't know how you want to approach this, Paddy, but yeah, let's do the kind of Yeah, some kind of what you would characterize, I suppose, as the high level summary of what you've described as the ultra light blockchain, or at least that's what it says on the website. So yeah, talk us through Minima, Paddy.
Okay, so the truth is that when we have the advantage of hindsight here, we have the benefit of being able to look back over the battlefield of blockchains and see what worked and what didn't work. We've also got a good decade of technology that has been created in this system. So there's lots of very nice pieces of technology that currently simply cannot be crowbarred and hard forked into these networks because they're too far along. But the truth is that the processing, when you see these massive racks of computers, they're not processing the network. What is the bottleneck? What is it that I can't do? I've got a mobile phone on me that's more powerful than my laptop was, 5 years ago. Computers are unbelievably powerful nowadays. So what is it exactly that I'm incapable of doing that I have to outsource to someone? And it's not the transactions. Yeah, processing the transactions is not what Bitcoin spends its time doing. That actual bit of it, the actual transactions in the block that Bitcoin has to process, it does in a second. All those computers that you see, all those massive racks and walls, that is all the hashing. That is all the business side of it. That is the competitive element. Bitcoin, Ethereum, all of the chains, they operate on this idea of a competitive game. All the miners compete against each other in a win-lose scenario. This is what it's known as game theoretically. When one miner wins a block, another miner doesn't win it, so he loses. Somebody wins, somebody loses. And actually what Minima does is it approaches this in a very different way. And it says, well, what if we played a cooperative game? What if I didn't compete with the other users on the network and we actually worked together? What if we collaborated? What if instead of me sitting there grinding away, trying to put in as much effort as I can, I actually did a small amount of work? And you, Andy, you did a small amount of work, nothing heavy. Your phone would be able to handle it. I'd like 1%, 1% of your phone, 1% of mine, 1% of the computers, 1% of a billion people. Suddenly you add all those little bits up and you start to get a rather large number. And that's what Minima does. So you're looking at a blockchain and you're thinking, well, look, I need a system that everybody can run. That's the first thing. It's like, I need a system that everybody is going to be able to run in full. And so the first conundrum is, well, what's it going to run on? And you say, well, I can't run it on a computer because, nobody's got computers, certainly not in the third world, India, et cetera, et cetera. And it certainly can't run on servers or Kubernetes clusters or any of that stuff, because that's also completely out of the range, not possible. So the only thing that you can reasonably expect every single person who's going to use this network will have access to is their mobile phone. So you go, okay, I've got to write a blockchain system that runs natively on your mobile phone. And then you say to yourself, okay, well, how am I going to squeeze all the data I need onto a phone? Yeah, how am I going to get these massive databases? Ethereum is, ridiculous. Bitcoin's on about 500 gigabytes, which is, manageable, but certainly not something you could do on your mobile phone. And this is where the advantage of hindsight comes in. So one of the pieces of tech that has been invented in the last 10 years is called a proof database. Peter Todd, a very great man, invented something called the MMR database back on Bitcoin Talk. And what that does is it creates a database where, if you imagine that currently everybody on the current networks, they have a really big book. And in that book, it says, Andy's got this much money, Paddy's got this much money. And so when one of us sends a transaction, they get the transaction, they open their big book and it goes, oh, yeah, Paddy's got that money. Okay, this is a valid transaction. Or Andy, you sent a transaction. And they look in their big bad book and they go, oh, yeah, I can see Andy's got that money, or he hasn't got the money. So it's either a valid transaction or it isn't. Well, what if we come up with a system where instead of everybody storing everything, each user only stored the data that was pertinent to them? So I would store the data that refers to my coins, and you, Andy, would store the data that refers to your coins. And when I send the transaction, I add a mathematical proof which shows the validity of those coins. In maths terms, this is known as a hash tree. And so what happens is that actually now on the Minima network, every user looks after their own coins, and all you, so you can think of it as all the users keep the spine of the book, only the spine. We don't keep the pages. The only page I keep is Paddy's page with Paddy's coins. The only page you keep is Andy's page with Andy's coins. And we can check that your page fits the spine. The spine is a very small amount of data. It's basically the root of the hash tree. And when you send a transaction, you can put in the transaction some mathsy stuff, which shows everybody on the network that those coins are valid. And that totally works. And so it's like, wow, okay, so what does that mean? So that means we've now got a database that can frankly grow into almost infinite size, where every user's actual data management doesn't grow. The size of the amount of data that I have to store is proportional to the number of coins I have, just as the amount of data that you store is proportional to the amount of coins that you have. At its lowest level, this is, we're talking maybe 5 megabytes forever. I mean, when you multiply this by billions of users, sure, we can get terabytes, we can get a petabyte database, but each actual individual user only stores a tiny amount. So that's how we got rid of the database issue. And that works, and we have a test net, and that's all running, nicely. That's called a proof database called MMR, blah, blah, blah. So now we've got this thing where we've got it running on a phone. We've managed to squash all the data so that nobody has to store everything, and everybody only stores the stuff that matters to them. As I mentioned earlier, the actual processing of the transactions, when you receive a block and it's got transactions, you have to process them. That's not a bottleneck either. Yeah, that's not what the Bitcoin miners are spending all their energy on. Your phone that can run, complex physics games at 120 frames per second can easily handle, the transaction rate that you can get through a blockchain. So that's another element that's been taken care of. We've now got this idea that it's got to run on a phone. Mm-hmm. We've got this tech that means that the data doesn't grow. We can process all of the transactions. And the third piece of the puzzle is this work. This idea about, well, look, how are we going to secure the chain? How are we going to get rid of the miners? How are we going to get rid of this emergent centralization? And that's the nice bit. So what we do there is a technique that actually IOTA, I don't know if you remember IOTA back in the day, Come From Beyond.
Yes, I do.
And what they did, and what was nice about them was that they came up with an idea. I mean, it doesn't work, IOTA. Yeah, it's totally broken because the tangle doesn't converge, blah, blah, blah. It's completely centralized. That's fine. There's always nice little bits in each of these blockchains. That's what's so nice about this movement. You don't have to love all of it, but there are bits of it that you like. And what IOTA did is they came up with a system where the users themselves protected the network by mining their transactions. So actually what they came up with was a system where the users would mine the transaction, and that work would be added to the tangle, and that the entire weight of that structure would be what protects the network. Minima does something similar, just that it keeps the blockchain. I don't know if you remember a protocol called Peter Pool way back in the day, which was a decentralized mining protocol.
No, I don't.
What was nice about that was that it allowed you to do a small amount of work amongst your friends and, whilst you were mining in a trustless way. And then if one of you found a block, that would be transmitted to the network. Even though you weren't actually looking for a block, you were looking for a smaller amount of data. Minima does this. Every user on the network mines their own transactions. Every user not only mines their on-chain transactions, but their off-chain transactions. So when we communicate with each other, you have to do a little bit of, I suppose that the nice way of referring to it is a little bit of hash cache work. And then we use more maths that sums all of that up together, and it comes up with one big unit of work. And importantly, and this is really the crux of it, you don't get paid. Your payment is the utility of the network. What we ask of you is so insignificant that it doesn't cost you anything, actually. What we say to you is, like, you need to do a little bit of work to access the network. And you're like, okay, cool, I'll do it. It doesn't stress your phone. And then we use maths to add all of that up, and that's what actually creates the blocks. So you end up with a power blockchain that is powered by every single user, who not only is involved in checking the whole chain. Every user runs a complete node. That means they validate every transaction, and every single user is involved in the construction of the chain. And that's the really important bit. Yeah. If I'm going to be honest, that's the bit that's missing from a lot of chains. They don't understand why that's so important. I'd love to bore you more about that.
Well, I mean, it all sounds great, Paddy. So I love this idea of an ultralight blockchain, so all users can use their phone as a node, and they're only storing, as you put it, the spine of the database and their individual page of transactions. It all makes sense, all right. But of course, I suppose, the big question, Paddy, and I'm sure this is another one perhaps that keeps you up at night. You'll be familiar with the term Lindy, the Lindy effect of Bitcoin, of course.
Absolutely, Andy.
So, and I'm sure the listeners are as well, but essentially it just means that the longer an idea is around, in this case, Bitcoin, the longer that Bitcoin is around, and because it has that first mover advantage, most people, when they think of cryptocurrency, they think of Bitcoin. Bitcoin has that mind awareness.
The network effect is almost insurmountable. I totally agree, Andy.
Agree. So you know where I'm going with this. Effectively,
absolutely.
My question, Paddy, is Minima sounds great, and it has all these advantages. Of course, you've been able to build on the successes and failures, pick and choose the good bits from other chains, as you've said. Of course, how do you get network effects? How do you get users onto a new network? Because there are so many thousands of these new chains popping up all the time. How does one begin to scale?
Let me say, well, I completely agree, Andy. And what I can say to that is that there is no competition to Bitcoin in the current crypto scene. That is a given. Yeah, I won't. There's nothing out there that can come close. Not Ethereum, not Polkadot, not Solana, not none of them. None of those chains are ever going to beat Bitcoin because they are not different enough. And what I mean by that is that Minima does something systemically different. So when I look at all the chains, what they've done, and they said, oh, we've got a better scripting, or we've got better blocks, or we've got a faster this, or, they've qualitatively changed some parameters, a parametric change of Bitcoin, but they haven't actually changed Bitcoin. They're the same. They're in a disguise, but underneath it all, they're just trying to, they're doing it the way Bitcoin does it. They have miners, stakers, validators, whatever you want to call it. They have the people that run the network, and they have the people that use the network. And in that regard, miner-centric chains, as I refer to them, there is no competition. There is nothing that can come close to Bitcoin. So if you're going to try and, if you want to have a shot at the title, then you're going to have to come up with something that is truly different. You're going to have to come up with something that actually runs in a way that, frankly, Bitcoin can never do. So I know people say, that if there are any nice things out there, Bitcoin will fork them in. I sort of believe that, Bitcoin's got to have one hard fork in it because of the clock bug, which is going to run out about 2032 or whatever it is. So they are going to have to hard fork. And when you have a hard fork, you can add anything, and anything that's proven itself to be wonderful. Now they're all talking about ZK rollups and how they want to have that as a function. Ethereum is just one opcode. Bitcoin is one opcode away from being Ethereum. Frankly, you could have OPEVM, and that would be all you need. So there is nothing out there that Bitcoin basically couldn't do except what Minima does. Minima does something that Bitcoin could never do, because what Minima does is it asks the miners to blow their brains out, and they're the ones that get to decide, so they're never going to get to do that. So I completely agree with you. The first 5 years of this run are certainly going to be tricky, and it's definitely going to take, years before people can start to take Minima seriously and think, oh, okay, you've been around the block and you've done your thing. But what I would say is that Minima is different. Minima tries to attack this problem in a fundamentally, systemically new way. We've removed the competitive element from the running of the network and converted it into a cooperative element. And I feel that may be enough. I feel that with that as our, as our weapon, this is an attack on Bitcoin. There's no question about that. You need something like that. You need to be doing something that is so different to the current crop that there is an inkling of a chance that you might be able to squeeze through. But certainly the odds are stacked against us. There's no question this is David and Goliath.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, just as we start to finish off, then, Paddy, give us a sense of, where you guys are at the moment. I think you talked about the test net. When is mainnet? I know you guys are doing a pre-sale, I think. So yeah, just kind of give us a sense of where everything is at and what and how people can do to get involved if they should wish to do so.
Well, Andy, you turned up just at the right time. You've missed all the making of the cake, and now we've made the cake, and we're actually going to have to eat it. So yes. Minima is launching its mainnet in the next 4 to 6 weeks. The pre-sale is actually going to be, on mainnet. This is all because of all the legal nonsense that we've had, all the hoops we've had to jump through. It actually has to be a live network for us to sell the coins. And so Minima is, we've been running in testnet now for about 2 years, really, with a stable network. It's ticking along very nicely. We've managed to get, about 700,000 people have signed up. And we've got about, in terms of actual users on the network, fully constructing and validating nodes, I think at the moment the metrics on about 350,000, which I would like to say is not simply the largest network compared to other networks. It is actually larger than the sum of all the other networks put together. So in terms of what Minima has achieved on its testnet run, we're doing pretty well. Go to minima.global, all the information is there. We've got applications for you to download for every computer, because obviously if it runs on a phone, it runs on everything. Yeah, the goal here is actually to go on IoT devices. The goal here is actually to put a Minima chip in your toaster, in your washing machine, in your fridge, runs a full node, independent, a sovereign machine to machine processing. Car industries all over us. It's like, oh my God. So yeah, we are at a good stage. The network is done. We have a 1.0 release. We're about to launch in 4 weeks. And frankly, it's getting pretty exciting. Walk down the street feeling a little bit sick, have a coffee, sit down in front of my computer for another 24-hour veg. So yeah, we're at the good bit now. We're at the sharp end of the stick, sir.
Fantastic. Really enjoyed hearing you talk today and learning all about Minima, Paddy. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Again, just take us out by telling people, I don't know if you have a Twitter account or anything yourself where you hang out online.
Well, I do have a Twitter account, but I don't like Twitter. I mean, I do like Twitter, but yeah. It's too censored. Yeah, it's like, but minima.global, that's the website. Go there, all the information, Discord, blah, 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 all the usual stuff. Go to the website and get stuck in, join the revolution.
Awesome. Thank you, Paddy. All the best and bye for now.
Thanks very much indeed, Andy. Thank you.
All right, there you go. That was Paddy from Minima. Fascinating, actually. Fascinating talking to Paddy. Yeah, I must admit, I wasn't super aware of Minima, but having had a good read through the website, and there's a lot of content on the website, and then, listening to Paddy today, absolutely fascinating idea. It sounds great. Of course, the difficulty is, like any of these things, is attracting users and getting that network effect. That's key, of course, to any of these chains. But yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on Minima. I like the sound of it. So if you want to learn more, just go to minima.global. Link, of course, will be in the show notes. But yeah, that is today's show. Thank you for listening, team. Don't forget to subscribe to the Crypto Conversation in whatever podcast app you are using. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening, team. Bye for now. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave a New Coin.